He wasn't sleeping. He hadn't slept like that, not really, not deeply, in 9 years. He was just resting, letting the sound of the waves do what nothing else had ever managed to do. Silence the part of his brain that never fully switched off. The part that was always monitoring, always calculating, always bracing for the next emergency. For 11 days, Daniel Holt had been trying to teach himself what peace felt like. And on the morning of the 5th day, he almost had it. His stomach dropped the moment he saw the name. 9 years of working for Westfield Technologies had trained his body to respond to Victoria Crane the way a soldier responds to a siren. Before his mind could catch up, his muscles were already tensing, because Victoria never called unless something was catastrophically wrong, or unless she wanted something. And in Daniel's experience, those two things were almost always the same. Daniel. Her voice was exactly what it always was, clipped, cold, carrying the particular temperature of someone who had decided long ago that warmth was inefficiency. I need you back in the office, now. He looked at Noah, his son, 9 years old, sand pressed into the creases of his knuckles, and he said what he had said 100 times before in 100 different ways. Victoria, I'm on approved vacation. You signed the authorization yourself. She didn't care. She never cared. The audit preparation had hit complications, systems only Daniel understood. His team was incompetent. And then the words she had never once in 9 years said, but had implied every single day. Your job is in serious jeopardy. Daniel felt the old pressure build behind his sternum, that familiar, crushing weight that had replaced his heartbeat somewhere around year 3 at Westfield. The pressure that said, say yes, apologize, fix it, that is who you are. And then Noah looked up from the ruined castle and said, quietly, Dad, look, I made a moat. And something in Daniel Holt snapped clean in two. Daniel Holt had not always been a man who counted years, but somewhere between his wife's funeral and his son's first birthday, time had become a currency he could no longer afford to spend on himself. He was 41 years old, a senior operations engineer at Westfield Technologies in Toronto, and for the better part of a decade, he had been the invisible backbone of a company that never once acknowledged how much it depended on him. When servers crashed at 2 in the morning, Daniel answered. When systems failed during product launches, Daniel stayed until it was solved. When other engineers left for their families, Daniel remained, because he no longer had a wife waiting for him, and his son had learned to sleep through the sound of his father typing in the next room. His wife, Claire, had passed away when Noah was just 3 months old. A sudden illness, the doctors had said, as if that explanation was supposed to help anything. One week she was laughing, planning their future, picking out names for the dog they were going to get once the baby started sleeping through the night. The next week, she was gone. Daniel had held their infant son at the funeral, numb with grief, and made a silent promise to be everything Noah would ever need. But promises made in the deepest dark are often impossible to keep in the light of ordinary days.
The years blurred together. Daniel threw himself into work because work was predictable. Code either functioned or it didn't. Systems either ran or they crashed. There was comfort in problems that had solutions, unlike the hollow ache in his chest that never seemed to fade. He told himself he was providing for Noah, building a stable future, being responsible. But deep down, in the hours just before dawn when the monitors were quiet and the house was still, he knew the truth. Work had become his escape, and his son had become an afterthought scheduled between emergencies. Noah never complained. That was perhaps the most heartbreaking part. 3 months before the vacation that changed everything, Noah asked a question that shattered something inside Daniel Holt. They were eating takeout at the kitchen table, half watching something on TV, Daniel's work phone face up between them, and the boy said, without accusation, without any dramatic weight at all, "Dad, do you remember the last time we did something together? Just us?" Daniel opened his mouth to answer, and then he realized he couldn't. He genuinely could not remember. That night, after Noah had put himself to bed, because he had learned to do that years ago, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen and cried for the first time since Claire's funeral. The vacation took 2 months to arrange. Daniel had accumulated so much unused time off that HR had actually called to verify his request wasn't a mistake. He coordinated with his team, documented every system he maintained, and created backup protocols for every conceivable scenario. He did everything right. He submitted through proper channels. He received written authorization from Victoria Crane herself, a single characteristic line: "Fine, don't let anything break while you're gone." As if that were Daniel's fault to manage. As if he hadn't spent 9 years making sure nothing ever broke in the first place. The first morning at the resort, Daniel woke without an alarm, a sensation so foreign it almost felt wrong. He made actual breakfast, not protein bars eaten over a keyboard, real breakfast, eggs, orange juice, the works. And then they walked to the beach together, and Daniel watched his son sprint toward the waves with a pure, unfiltered joy that no screen had manufactured. For the first time in 9 years, Daniel Holt felt something approaching peace. And then the phone rang. Victoria didn't raise her voice. She never had to. "Then you've made your choice," she said. "Consider this your official termination, effective immediately. HR will send the paperwork." The line went dead. Daniel sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. Fired. After 9 years of perfect performance, after being the person who held everything together, after sacrificing his health, his relationships, his very presence in his own son's life, he had been discarded in a 3-minute phone call. He looked at Noah, who was standing in front of him now, concern clouding his face. "Dad, what's wrong? You look weird." And Daniel looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw Claire's eyes looking back. And he made a different choice. He turned off the phone. "Everything's going to be fine, buddy," Daniel said, pulling Noah into a hug that surprised them both. "Now show me this moat. Does it actually hold water?" Noah's face lit up with a smile Daniel hadn't seen nearly enough. "I don't know yet. We have to test it." And they walked together toward the shoreline, buckets in hand, and Ethan felt something shift deep inside him. He had just lost his job, his income, his professional identity. By any rational measure, he should have been panicking. But with his son's hand in his and the waves rolling in beneath a cloudless sky, Daniel Holt felt free.
The peace lasted 14 hours. By the following morning, Daniel's phone, which he had reluctantly powered back on to check for messages from Noah's school, was flooded with 17 emails from Westfield Technologies. HR outlined the termination process in clinical, detached language. Legal referenced non-compete clauses he had signed years ago, buried in paperwork he'd barely skimmed. And Victoria herself sent a message so precisely engineered to wound that Daniel read it 3 times. "Your sudden departure has caused significant operational disruption. I have informed our industry contacts of your unreliable behavior." The fear came first, cold, familiar, professional. Then came anger. Then, unexpectedly, came clarity. Victoria was afraid. That was the only explanation for this. If Daniel's departure truly meant nothing, why the threats? Because without him, things were already falling apart. The picture his former colleagues painted over the following days was chaotic. Systems that Daniel had maintained single-handedly for years were failing in ways no one else understood. The documentation he had left behind, comprehensive, painstakingly organized, was apparently incomprehensible to engineers who had never bothered to learn how anything actually worked. One colleague had accidentally locked himself out of 3 critical systems within the first 6 hours. The backup protocols had revealed a problem Daniel had been quietly correcting every night for weeks, a problem no one else even knew existed. Westfield Technologies, a company valued at several $100 million, was being held together by digital duct tape. And the only person who knew where all the tape was had just been fired for taking an approved vacation. The most significant contact came from Diane Mercer, Westfield's longest-standing client and the CEO of a healthcare technology company that depended on Westfield's infrastructure for critical patient data systems. She called directly, which she had never done before. "Victoria told us you abandoned the company during a crisis," Diane said, "that you left without warning and refused to return. But that doesn't match anything I know about you from 9 years of working together. What actually happened?" Daniel told her the truth, all of it. The approved vacation, the phone call, the termination, the threats, the blacklist. Diane's response was immediate. "She fired you for taking time off she personally approved?" A pause. "Daniel, do you have documentation?" He had everything. "Good," Diane said, "because I'm pulling my contract from Westfield by the end of the month, and I won't be the only one." It was on the 4th evening of the vacation that everything changed, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but in the way that real turning points often arrive, quietly, sideways, through a stranger sharing your table because the dining room was full. The man introduced himself simply, Robert Ashford. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing the kind of simple clothing that somehow managed to cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. Daniel thought nothing of it. Then Noah, with the guileless honesty of a child, pointed to Robert's phone and said, "My dad knows that program. He works on stuff like that all the time." Robert Ashford, Daniel gradually understood over the course of an hour, was not just a conference attendee with a technical hobby. He was the founder and chairman of Cascade Dynamics, one of the largest cloud infrastructure companies in the world. The man quietly sharing a modest dinner at a Carolina beach resort was worth several $billion, and he had spent the last 40 minutes listening to Daniel describe, without embellishment, the systems he had built. "You're telling me," Robert said slowly, "that you built most of Westfield's core infrastructure yourself, maintained it for 9 years, and they fired you for taking a vacation?" Daniel nodded. Robert shook his head, something between disbelief and disgust. "I've met Victoria Crane at industry events, always found her impressive in a superficial way. Clearly, I misjudged the situation." He studied Daniel for a long moment, not the way Victoria had, as a tool to be assessed, but as something else entirely. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a card on the table. "Call me when you're ready to talk about what comes next." Victoria Crane arrived at the beach resort on the 5th day. Daniel spotted her from 50 yards out and felt nothing, or rather, he felt something he hadn't expected, pity. She looked wrong here, out of context. The authority she wielded at Westfield was a product of walls and fluorescent lights and org charts and the particular fear that comes from knowing someone controls your paycheck. Out here, under open sky, with the ocean doing what oceans do, she was just a woman in expensive shoes, sinking with every step. "Name your price," she said. "Salary increase, title change, whatever you want. We can pretend this entire situation never happened." Daniel looked up at her calmly. "Can we pretend you didn't fire me for taking a vacation you approved? Can we pretend you didn't threaten to blacklist me from the entire industry? Can we pretend you didn't call my dedication to my son selfishness?" Her composure cracked. "I was under pressure. You don't understand the position I was in." "I understand perfectly," he said, and he finally stood, bringing himself eye to eye with the woman who had controlled his professional life for 9 years. "You were in a difficult position, so you took it out on the person least likely to fight back. That's what you've always done, Victoria. That's what you do to everyone who works for you." "Please," she said. The word came out strained, unfamiliar. "I'm asking you to help us." Daniel looked past her, to where Noah was waving from the water, gesturing for him to come join. "You're right about one thing," he said quietly. "The company deserves to fail. Neither did I. But you made your choice, Victoria. Now I'm making mine." He walked past her, toward the water, toward his son, toward a future that didn't include Westfield Technologies. Behind her, Victoria Crane stood alone on the sand, watching everything she had built begin to crumble.
"Dad," Noah said on their second-to-last evening at the resort, "are you sad about your old job?" The Carolina sky was doing something extraordinary, burning itself out in shades of orange and pink before the dark. "I'm sad for the people being hurt," Daniel said. "I'm sad that things had to fall apart this way. But I'm not sad about leaving. I should have left a long time ago." Noah absorbed this with the careful, thoughtful consideration he had inherited entirely from his mother. "Mom would have told you to leave, wouldn't she?" The question caught Daniel completely off guard. Noah rarely mentioned Claire, not because he had forgotten her, but because the memories were complicated for a child who had never really known her. "Yes," Daniel said, his voice thick. "She would have told me to leave years ago. She always said that a job should serve your life, not the other way around." He pulled his son close against the cooling evening breeze. "I forgot that for a long time." "But you remember now," Noah said simply. "Yeah, buddy, I remember now." 3 weeks after the phone call on the beach, Daniel Holt started his new position at Cascade Dynamics. The transition was everything Robert had promised and more. Daniel worked from home most days, his schedule built around Noah's school hours and Saturday games. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He cooked dinner every night. He was there for bedtime, something he hadn't managed consistently since Noah was a toddler. The work itself was challenging and genuinely fulfilling. He wasn't just maintaining systems anymore. He was designing new approaches, building teams that could function without relying on any single person's heroic effort. He was teaching others what he knew. He was creating something that could survive his eventual departure. For the first time in his career, Daniel Holt felt valued rather than exploited. On a Saturday morning in late autumn, Daniel and Noah returned to the Carolina coast. Not the same resort. That place held complicated memories, but a different beach, a fresh start. They walked along the shoreline together, collecting shells, dodging waves, talking about everything and nothing. Noah was animated in a way Daniel had rarely seen, sharing stories from school, asking questions about the future, making plans for adventures they might take together. And then Noah stopped, held up a shell, looked at it for a long moment, and said, without preamble, without setup, "Dad, I'm glad you got fired." Daniel laughed. "That's an unusual thing to be glad about." "I mean it," Noah said, looking up at his father with Claire's eyes, warm, serious, completely unguarded. "You're different now. You're actually here, not just your body, you, all of you." The words hit Daniel with a force he hadn't prepared for. For 9 years, he had believed he was doing the right thing, providing stability, building security, sacrificing for his family's future. But his son had needed something far simpler, a father who was present. "I should have figured that out a long time ago. I'm sorry it took so long." Noah shrugged, and the guarded skepticism that had shadowed his expression for years, that careful, protective distance, began, finally, to fade. "That's okay. You figured it out eventually. That's what matters." They continued walking, father and son, the autumn sun warm on their faces, the waves rolling endlessly against the shore. Behind them, the footprints they left in the sand stretched back toward a past Daniel could no longer change. Ahead of them lay a future built on different choices. Being fired felt like an ending. It turned out to be the beginning of everything that actually mattered. And somewhere in the sound of those waves, in the weight of his son's hand in his, Daniel Holt finally understood the most important lesson he would ever teach, that a man's worth should never be traded away for people who would never, ever reciprocate.
For more videos, please subscribe, like, and comment.